Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast. I'm Kelly Callahan-Poe. Today's episode is called The ROI of Moms in the Workplace. I am joined today by Heather Lane Powers. Heather is the founder and CEO of The Power Lane, a consultancy that guides organizations to accelerate their businesses and revenue goals with more effective engagement and retention of working mothers. She is a former corporate executive and now coaches, speaks, and consults on simple and more systematic workplace changes that benefit all employees and the bottom line. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me and thanks for giving me a sneak peek at your book
Yes.
before everyone else. I was so excited to get a chance to read it on my iPad. And so I have so many questions because this is such an important topic. Let's kind of ask a broad question first, and then I want to go a little bit deep and talk a little bit more historically. The premise of your book is called The Power Lane, Why Keeping Moms in the Workplace Revs the Economy. And you have the word revs in all caps, REVS. And your premise is that American moms lack the support to fully engage in the economy. And solving this is a business imperative, not just for organizations, but also for the economy as a whole. What inspired you to write this book, and why is this mission so important to you?
Yeah. Really, COVID is the reason that got me interested in this idea and then uh, decided to just jump into it. So in COVID, I think we all realized that what we had or what we thought we had in place was not really working, and certainly was not working for working moms. And I experienced that. My kids were entering middle school and high school at the time. And we had a lot of conversations like, oh, thank goodness, right? They're not babies, they're not toddlers, they're not launching into college or careers. But I think everyone had a challenge at some point in
Yeah.
that. And again, I'd been working before and working all the way through both of my kids. And I thought I had it all figured out. And I realized abruptly that what I had and sort of piecemealed together, or the structures I thought I had in place, were not that solid and kind of came apart in COVID. So that's what got me started down this journey.
Well, I want to kind of roll this back because I feel like all women around our age are having the same journey. And I want to roll it back to, a dozen years ago. And the
Yeah.
conversation really started in my mind, and you tell me if I'm wrong, with Anne-Marie Slaughter's article in 2012 that she wrote for The Atlantic, why women still can't have it all. And it caused a lot of chaos at the time. But what she really meant that somehow didn't come across is that yes, women can have it all if you have a supportive partner,
Right.
if you are already at a certain income level so that you can afford childcare and a flexible job that enables that as well. And so that article to me kind of kicked a lot of this conversation out off that women hadn't necessarily been having. And then the pandemic happened with the She Session, where 2 million women left the workforce because they had to help their kids do Zoom on their own, right?
Right. Right.
But since then, things have changed. And I think part of your book, you talked about in the July 2024 workforce participation rate right now among women is at pre-pandemic levels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that article absolutely was pivotal. I remember where it came out. My kids were young, elementary school or
Yeah.
preschool age. And I was like, exactly, right? We can have it all, but that's the sort of ideal version with all those supports that you mentioned. Um, yes, we saw the She Session where a lot of women left the workforce really out of necessity, because I think we all, um, I, most of us in a situation where it's your family or personal or work things, you have to take care of your family.
Yeah.
And we left out of necessity and then realized, okay, one, we need to, right? We have to support the kids, food, shelter, all of that. Um, and then in many cases, we'd all worked so hard to get our careers that sitting at home, and I know it's not just sitting at home eating bonbons, but sitting at home, that you're not contributing to the family, you're not contributing to the community. And so it's interesting to sort of track again from that 2 million in the first few months of the pandemic leaving. And we talked about that sort of ad nauseum. And then to sort of watch women come back. And again, I think it was out of necessity, because rent didn't go away, right? Mortgages didn't go away. Food was more expensive if not. And we had to come back to work. What is shocking to me about looking at the labor participation rate over really the last 9 to 12 months is that, as you mentioned, women are back at a higher rate. Moms are back. And when I first dug into it, I'm like, well, okay, moms sort of my age with teenagers, they're not as necessary for the day to day, but it's moms with kids under 12 and really moms with kids under 5, under age 5. Those are the toughest years. And I say that a little tongue in cheek because every phase has its tough moments, but that's when they need you more consistently throughout the day. And
Sure.
so it's hard. And we've talked a little bit about or mentioned childcare remains a challenge. And so how are they figuring it out? Well, they're doing it somehow. They're getting back to work. And some of it's necessity, some of it's, again, interest. Many have worked hard again to get their careers and they want to contribute. And so they're making it work. But again, I think it's piecing it together. It's pretty individual and certainly not with the structures, even that I enjoyed 10, 15 years ago.
That's true. One of the things I had an opportunity to interview Joanne Lublin, who wrote the book The Power
Yes.
Moms, and
Yeah.
she gave a stat that just kind of blew me away, and it was the whole idea of the motherhood penalty. That
Yeah,
over a 30-year career, mothers could lose as much as $510,000 in wages, assuming that earnings remain constant. Well, that's a pretty big slap in the face if you look at it that way, in terms of, you know, over
absolutely.
the course of a career. At the
Yeah,
same time, you have found research that the most productive women, mothers, are those with two or more kids over a 30-year career. Is that correct?
that is. Yes. It was an interesting study done by the Federal Reserve and pretty extensive. It wasn't a few hundred or even a few thousand, but they looked at employees and then they said, like, who are the most productive? And it came down to interesting moms and moms with kids, more than two kids, two or more kids, rather. Um, and that you sort of dive into it, you're like, well, of course, right? They have to be productive. They make
Yeah.
the most out of every minute of their day. And so they're going to be as productive as possible at work to be able to go home and take care of their home and family responsibilities.
Which is why we're recording a podcast on a Saturday morning.
That's right. We fit it in where we can, right?
All right. Well, I want to understand a little bit about kind of what are the structural barriers for women's participation in work. I think we know the basics, but maybe you could recap.
Yeah, so we mentioned childcare. That's a big one.
And an expensive one.
Very, yes. It's interesting. Chatting with some women friends that have kids roughly the same age as mine, and they're like, "Well, we figured it out. Like, what's the big deal?" And I was like, oh, "Spend 5 minutes on it, right? Like, just spend 5 minutes on where we are today.
It
We're
depends on
not
where you live too, right?
absolutely, absolutely. So we're not even back to 2019 levels of childcare, and that wasn't sufficient 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. Um, on top of that, we have extended childcare deserts, which are areas of the country where there is no childcare. And so when you say, okay, go back to work and figure out childcare, it depends on where you live. You might have some. If you're lucky enough to have some available, it might not be affordable, probably isn't affordable. And so that's a huge barrier. And we are in a place where we don't always have that village of, parents, grandparents around us to provide that support. So you sort of
Yeah.
build your village, but childcare continues to be a big barrier.
And the other ones?
So yeah, the workplace flexibilities. I think if we can find a silver lining in COVID, many in the knowledge industry working jobs that are a bit flexible into where they can get their job done, we show that we can be as productive, if not more productive, when we have the flexibility to work, whether it's at home or where, again, we can integrate that personal and professional life more easily. So that has been great. The downside is that many organizations are requiring people back to work. And in many cases, it doesn't seem that they are being studied or evaluated on what makes the most sense for the employees or even the work and how to get it done. Chuckling with some family in the area who work in the federal government, and many agencies are requiring them to come back. There isn't space. Parking is a
Yeah.
challenge. They're sitting in closets or hallways because they don't have space in the office, but yet someone decided that they have to be back in the office. So that's requiring challenges because, you know, being able to integrate your lives and like, oh, well, that's not necessary. Well, it is. Again, if childcare isn't available and you're piecemealing together someone to watch your children, even just running out for an appointment, personal or for someone you're caring for, those things you can integrate more easily if you have a little flexibility. So that's a big one. Um, the expectations is another one. Had some really interesting conversations lately around some new books, and then also just like, what are we doing? And the expectations around mothers being the primary caregiver. That's a huge one. And I think in we're at least having the conversation now. I know I have been extremely lucky to have a very supportive partner who's been with me all the way. And oftentimes he would get the call from daycare as much as I would, or one of us would get it and then decide whose meetings that afternoon were more important. Right? But I know I'm very lucky because whether we have partners who aren't as flexible or can't be, or for all the single parents out there,
Yeah.
the children in a single family household, 80% of those are moms. And they're, again, trying to balance the need to have a job and provide income for the family with taking care of their children. So all of those kind of add up to strong headwinds against moms.
One part of your book, you actually talked about how men frequently will be given a bump in salary if they become a parent, but women won't because men have more pressure to support their family. That's pretty much of a double-edged sword that really hurts.
Right. Yeah, that fatherhood bonus. It's upwards of 6 to 10% for every child they have, whereas women lose 4% or more for every child they have. And to your earlier point around that adds up to significant earnings and savings over their lifetime.
Yeah.
And what's the difference? Uh, perhaps where we live here in the Mid-Atlantic, I know many families where the woman is the primary breadwinner. Not to
Yeah.
say that her partner isn't contributing, but that's a big change, and we haven't caught up to that reality.
Yeah. So, to me, the headline of your whole book is really from a macroeconomic lens. How does retaining in the mothers in the workforce contribute to long-term economic resilience and innovation? What are the numbers?
Yeah, so the numbers are pretty stark. Um, if we were able to support women in the workplace, as we had prior to the pandemic and what we're seeing, we could see like a 25% jump in the GDP. That's huge. And that's one of the reasons that I was so excited to write the book and take this lens. We've argued and again, I think proven that having women in the workforce is extremely productive and extremely helpful. We've shown that having women in executive positions, leadership roles, the C-suite contributes financially to the organization. They're more resilient, all sorts of good things having women there. What we haven't argued, I don't think enough, is right now we're in a talent shortage across every industry. And we're not solving that, right? We haven't solved it in the last 5 years or so. We're not seeing any changes in our immigration policies that would help address it. And yet we have this cohort of very qualified, eager to work women and mothers who can help solve that. And we're not thinking about, well, what exactly do they need to be able to jump in or stay in the workforce in a way that's meaningful and contributes to the organization. So I think we have kind of the perfect scenario here of organizations that need good qualified employees and individuals like moms who are qualified and want to work. And we need to figure out things like schedules, supports, childcare, the right leadership support. And those are not, some sound big and some sound hairy, but those are things that we can fix.
Yeah, so that leads to kind of you talk about the five levers or solutions that organizations can help support to make
Yeah.
this a reality. And you talked about a couple of those. Can you kind of list out what those five levels are
Yeah.
and what are the things that leadership at different organizations need to do in order to start having these conversation? Because really we're talking about women 25 to 54, right? That's the
Yes.
the audience that we're trying to reach, which is the
Right.
core audience of moms as well.
Exactly. Yes. So I'll list out the five. I think to start, what leaders can do is think about, have they been talking with their moms, their parents, their caregivers, um, and assessing what they need? Because it seems simple, but we don't often take that time. And in some of my work in corporate and since, just having those conversations, a few focus groups will give you some really rich data on, if only I had, I would better be able to balance work and home, or I'd be better able to integrate all of this. And most of these are not costly or huge time commitments. So I emphasize that point as much as I can. Just ask your moms, your dads, your caregivers what they need, because it's often a rather simple fix. So the five things, and I start with leadership because that is critical. In most cases, an employee's single or primary connection to the organization is their immediate supervisor. And in many cases, that supervisor, that leader, hasn't received a ton of training when they were elevated or promoted to that leadership position. Perhaps they got the handbook. Maybe they got a little guidance on how to approve time or expenses, but they probably haven't had a lot of training on the various scenarios that their team will come to them to help navigate. That was really highlighted during COVID, and it certainly even the most experienced manager was presented with new scenarios in that period. But the idea of providing leaders with good training, because they tend to be that primary or in many cases single connection between the worker and the organization. Then, as we touched upon, the flexibilities, workplace flexibilities. It could be where they work, it could be the schedule they work, um, it could be how they work. And again, those don't have to be huge, expensive solutions. In many cases, it's, what are the core hours of work? Okay, I will figure out my childcare, my commute, whatever the challenge is, in a way that I can be in the office or be available for those core hours when the rest of the team is also available. It sounds simple, but I know that tends to be a barrier for some reason. Um, then we go to paid leave. And that shockingly is so inconsistent across, not just across our organizations, but across the jurisdictions in which we work. So understanding what paid leave is available, whether it's your town, your city, your state, and then within your organization, like what are the paid leave options? When we talk about moms and paid leave, we immediately go to maternity leave, but it's really talking about everything: your paid time off, your sick leave, holiday, um, what is available to you, and are you taking it? And here is obviously moms want to use every day they have, because whether they have to cover those kid vacation days or the day off from schools or what have you, they're maximizing their time off. But if you're not a mom or not a parent, also encourage you to take your paid leave, because that enforces the culture of using the leave available. And we've all seen the studies around taking that break and how helpful it is for our mental state as well as productivity when we come back. Um, then we go to pay equity, and we touched upon some of the challenges here with the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood bonus, but really taking a look at how are you compensating all of your employees. And we all have biases, right? We're all human. But if you haven't taken a look recently at how you're compensating, and that's everything, not just salary, but perhaps there are bonuses or there are other benefits, making sure that any potential bias is identified, and then if there is something, addressed. Because at the end of the day, it's what's the work done? How is it, what's the impact of that work, the output of that work? And people should be compensated for that and not for who they are, their role outside of the office, things like that. And shockingly, we're still seeing some big discrepancies in pay across organizations. And then the fifth one is childcare. So we've hit upon this a little bit, but again, it's understanding what your employee group needs are. There are some great stories of organizations that realized, hey, we need people, they want to work, we're in a childcare desert, or the childcare available in our area just isn't sufficient, or it just doesn't support the hours. I bring up Whirlpool a lot because they're located in a part of Michigan that didn't have sufficient childcare. And some of the employees worked shift hours. And so the childcare that was available maybe didn't open early enough or stay open late enough. And so Whirlpool went and built their own childcare center. And that has been a huge success for them. And I love that they call it the Eddy. But but that's a great example of an organization that said, we have a need, we have people who want to work and are qualified in the area. Childcare seems to be the barrier. How do we fix that? So those are the five.
And then going back to leadership, a part of your book, you talk about women or people in general don't leave organizations, they leave managers.
Yes.
So how can leaders kind of make sure that they're getting that message down across the board?
Yeah, I think several things that can happen, and they're not huge, expensive solutions. So making sure that your frontline managers have the resources they need to support the team that they're in charge of or have responsibility for. Again, a little bit of employee training or manager training goes a long way, and checking in with them regularly, checking in with the employees. Skip level conversations are helpful. That's a great way to, again, assess how everything is going and if there's a blind spot or potentially an opportunity to provide more training. I think that's a great way. Um, the handbook is only so helpful, and I know a lot of managers will say, "Oh, well, we provided the handbook, and that should solve all the problems." It's more of a cultural and a comfort with managing people, and also a comfort level with uh, an employee coming and asking for or help with a situation, and it could be completely new to a manager because they personally haven't experienced it or haven't seen it in their organization, and giving the manager the comfort to then elevate that and say, I don't know how to deal with this. Please help me. I want to help my colleague. I don't know exactly how to do it and what's sort of within the bounds of our policies or within legal options. That it should be a combination. We can't all be expected to know every possible scenario and be able to address it on our own. And unfortunately, I think many managers feel like they have to go it alone. And if they don't know how to help an employee, it's a no from the start.
The title of your book includes the abbreviation REVS. Can you talk a little bit about those four gears or REVS or action levels that everyone can take to help moms?
Yeah, so uh, a little play on words, and I like to describe it a little bit or from the reverse because I think that helps. So the S is for self, and that suggests that all of us have a role in this. I mentioned paid leave. If you're an individual contributor, kind of doing your job and don't have children or aren't responsible for others outside of work, um, you might be able to uh, you can at least take the paid leave that you have and reinforce that culture. You can step up and say, "Hey, it looks like you're a little crazy. How about I finish this document, or how about I take the lead on this and you go take care of whatever you have to take." It's sort of finding your voice and being a supportive team member in your team. So that's S, the self. V is for village. We've all heard the phrase, "It takes a village." I think that applies to work as well as home or raising kids. And that is where you might have a little more influence. Perhaps you do have a title of a manager or a leader, but you also could just have a bit more positional authority because of the work you've done, the relationships you have. And so that's again using your voice to influence a little bit more broadly because of who you are. So again, it maybe is reinforcing taking all your leave, supporting a team member whenever they need an extra hand for whatever reason, and creating that culture that when you need a hand for whatever reason, your colleagues will help you again. E is for ecosystem, and that is meant to envision perhaps you're a bit higher in the organization, you have broader authority or influence. This shouldn't all be tied to your actual title, although that helps in many cases. We all have colleagues or perhaps have been in situations where we have influence because of the work we've done, the relationships we've built, our network. And so using that and using it for good. And so highlighting where we can do better or we can better support our employees. So that village, I'm sorry, that ecosystem is our E. And then the R is, I call it regulatory for a catch-all term, but it's the policies, it's the laws, it's what is out there to both guide, and it's also using your position, and this is, I'm thinking more senior leaders, executives, to broaden the conversation beyond your organization itself, perhaps into your industry, perhaps into your community, the area that you're working in, and saying, "Gosh, we implemented this, and it's working so well," or "We're struggling with this. How are you guys handling that particular situation?" So it's meant to be collaborative, and again, Revs. If we all do a little part, we can make the workplace better for all.
So this story of the GDP that women in the workplace could actually be putting into the U.S. Economy. How do we get? Is it your goal to get the word out? Are you hoping this gets picked up? Are you hoping that there's a light bulb within American organizations and the U.S. government that hey, there's a real opportunity here, and there's numbers behind it?
Yes, yes. I think we all, I think we've all bought into that women are educated and want to work, and we've had that conversation around the diversity component, but we haven't right now we're at the bottom. It's impacting the bottom line. And I think in many organizations, that's the first place they look. And when it hits the bottom line or it impacts their ability to meet their monthly or revenue targets, then then there's a need to do something. And so sort of taking advantage of this unfortunate talent shortage, which doesn't show any signs of course correcting anytime soon,
Yeah.
to say, okay, how do we meet this need that you have? We can't we can't clone men. We can't produce more workers any faster than we are. So how do we fix the need that most organizations and industries have and match the skilled people that we have that want to work? And again, hopefully these accelerators, these ideas presented in the book offer some clues as to how they might want to do it in their organization.
Wonderful. Well, how can listeners learn more about you or purchase your book?
No, thank you. So probably my website is the best. I'll keep that up to date. Right now, the book is out on Amazon, and we're expanding that into other retailers. But heatherlanepowers.com is a great place to start. And obviously, I'm on LinkedIn as well, and look forward to engaging.
Thank you so much for joining me, Heather. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for your time.